Swords, spears, and arrows will kill them! For the true cause of their defeat and deaths is idiocy! Make ready!
Rome. As we look deeper into its origins and the history, we learn that this massive entity was a patchwork of civilizations, a melting pot of cultures, new ideas, and the first society to think about its footprint after it erodes from the geopolitical scale. Welcome back, once again, to another episode of the Story of the Ancients. Today, we will be talking about the 7 kings, starting with Romulus, the first king of Rome. We will do 2 kings per video for the sake of briefness. When we think of Mediterranean history, there are 3 cities that come to mind, all founded about the same time in history. Carthage, founded by the Phoenicians, the masters of trade, founded in about 800 BCE. The second, Rome, founded around 753 BCE. In some sense by the Etruscans and Greeks, depending on whose evidence and who you're getting your facts from. Some people say the Etruscans, some people say the Sabines, some people say something different. In any case, the third city being Syracuse. We want to say it's Syracuse because that's, how the U.S. city is pronounced. But it's Syracuse, founded on the island of Sicily in 734 BCE. I point this out because it's important to distinguish this sort of triangle in the Mediterranean and why one became the dominant power years later. The reason was because Rome was showing signs of doing things that were way ahead of everyone else, and today we get to explore why these ideas made Rome so important, starting with the first king of Rome. We talked previously how Romulus came into power and some of the things he did during his reign, so I'm not going to get into super deep detail with Romulus because I've pretty much gone over a lot of what he did in my previous video. However, we will go into a little bit more detail as to the different cultural changes he brought to Rome. With such a violent beginning, it should be no real surprise that during his reign he granted free asylum to criminals and vagabonds. From here forward, fact and myth tend to conflict with one another, hence I will only be going over what is regarded as absolute fact. After the founding of Rome, Romulus needed people to settle his new city, so he threw open the doors and told people to come in and settle, and very quickly he had seen his first settlers. However, the only problem was that they were nearly all men. That, as well as being criminals and outcasts. To quell this problem, what did the ever so resourceful Romans do? They threw a banger of a party, and they invited everyone around them. On the guest list, they had some pretty high-up chieftains from the Sabine, and as well as their wives and daughters, and pretty much anybody in the region that was important, and their wives and daughters as well. But the party was bait. As the party was in the pitch, Romulus gave a signal and his men rushed in and grabbed all the women and just as quickly ran off into the darkness. The men took the women to be wives and concubines. Obviously this had some major political repercussions. As the Roman historian Livy tells us, what we are starting to realize is the mind of King Romulus. How do you lead a group of kidnapped women, vagabonds, and criminals to become a superpower? You do what you want. You rape, you pillage, you destroy anything that's in your way. And it's a great story too, right? And it's widely regarded as true. During his reign of 37 years, Romulus created the Senate, which would be the foundation of Rome's political system. The Senate's main function, however, during the monarchical society, was to carry out and administer the wishes of the king and act as a general sitting assembly. The rest of what we hear about Romulus is shrouded in myth and legend, which was likely a political move in later years to add a mysterious vestige to the Republic. The second king of Rome. We will move on now to Numa Pompilius. Almost a polar opposite of his predecessor, he was not a warmonger. Unlike Romulus, who was killed by his own senators, ripped apart limb by limb during a storm, Numa eventually died of old age. During his reign from 715 to 673 BCE, he had introduced a few new cultural concepts to Rome. Before we get into that, I want to point out that there was considerable unrest between the original Romans and the Sabines who had joined them after the city was founded, over who would be the next king. For the time being, it was arranged that the senators would each rule with the king's powers for a period of 12 hours until a more permanent solution could be found. Eventually, they decided that the Romans and Sabines should each elect a king from the other group, i.e. the Romans would select a Sabine and the Sabines a Roman. The Romans were to choose first, and their choice was the Sabine Numa Pompilius. Numa distributed the land conquered by Romulus to poor citizens, hoping that an agricultural way of life would make the Romans less of a warlike group. He would go about the countryside and inspect the farms himself, promoting those whose farms looked good and were well cared for and tended. People still thought of themselves as the first original Romans or Sabines rather than citizens of Rome at this time as well. So to overcome this division, Numa organized the people into guilds based on occupations. Essentially, this created the first economic classes. And that's why I pointed out earlier that Rome was thinking way ahead of its time. But anyways, in Romulus' time, the calendar had been fixed at 360 days to the year, but the number of days in a month greatly varied. Numa estimated the solar year at 365 days and the lunar year at 354 days. He doubled the difference of 11 days and instituted a leap month between February and March. February and March being the first months of the year. Numa made January the first month. It's disputed he may have added January and February as well. The month of January is associated with the god Janus, whose temple was built under Numa as well. However, one peculiar thing about this temple, the doors of the temple were left open in times of war and closed in times of peace. In Numa's reign of 43 years, the doors remained closed entirely. Numa died at the age of 80. During his reign, brought the Sabine idea of Vestal virgins to Rome and created the Pontifex Maximus. The daughter Pompilla, who was married to Marcius, the son of Marcius, who had persuaded Numa to accept the throne, their son, Ancus Marcius, was 5 years old when Numa died, and he later became the fourth king of Rome. Thank you again for watching, and thank you for coming by, and I want to give a huge thanks to all my major supporters again for helping me with this project, helping me get it out there and reach the masses. Thank you all for watching. If you learned something from this video, please like the video and subscribe for more content on the series. I'm going to continue with the rest of the Kings and the Sibylline books, which is a really interesting part of Roman history because it dictated Roman history for the duration of the entire empire. Anyways, thank you all again, and I'll be seeing you in the next episode.